This is the Sony RX1R Mark III, a fairly divisive camera when it came out. But I personally have picked one up and have been using it almost daily for the past few months now. So as a follow-up to my initial video, I want to talk about why I ended up actually picking one of these up, what things I got right, what things I got wrong, and the reason why I think a lot of people are just completely off about this thing. Now, if you want to hear a little bit more about this, obviously you can check out my initial video up here that was done kind of like as the camera was being released or soon after. And I'll also say that I am in a very unique position as someone that has been a full-time professional photographer for almost 20 years now. And I also have a lot of access to more cameras than a normal person would. I'm filming on a different, I'm just like, I have way more photography gear than a normal person would. And I think that that is part of the reason why some people had a bit of an issue with this camera. And again, why this it's not like a logical sense kind of camera. Like, you're not gonna buy this camera for a value play. But I think the thing is that a lot of people think that it is a lot more expensive than it should be, and why I kind of don't feel that way, or I guess I kind of understand the pricing a lot more now that I've used it for a while. So right off the bat, this is a incredibly compact camera. It's hard to kind of put into words how small this is, but like, it's the size of my palm. Let's see here. It is actually much smaller than my phone. It's about the exact same width as my phone, in terms of just that side to side. Obviously, it's shorter than my phone this way, but I mean, clearly the bigger issue is going to be that it has a much thicker body and a big lens sticking out of the front of it. It's also smaller than an X100 series camera. And what I really like about it is it harkens back a lot more to like the film point and shoot cameras. So this is a Fujifilm Class W. And I will absolutely admit that the lens on a typical film point and shoot camera is a lot smaller than the lens on this. But if you kind of look at the size here in general, it's pretty much the same size as a legitimate old school point and shoot camera. And in fact, it's just a tiny, tiny bit smaller on this length at least. Again, you're going to be bigger on the lens front. It's going to stick out a little bit further there. But the thing is, I think a lot of people are seeing this as a Leica Q competitor or a Fujifilm GFX RF competitor, and that's just not how I see this camera. I understand that they fill a similar void in the market in terms of like a premium compact camera, but I see this very, very differently. For me, the fact that I was able to grab both these cameras that were just readily available sitting behind me is probably a good indication of how I'm in a different position than most people are. The first thing that people are going to think of is, why don't you just buy the A7CR? And it has the same sensor, it is the ability to interchange lenses, and it functions for most people as a bit of a like personal fun camera for them that also is incredibly capable. The thing about this little camera though is that it is so much smaller even than an A7CR, and an A7CR is even smaller than a Leica Q3. But for me, I found that the difference in between, and I said this in my initial video, and I think this is the thing that I really held on to and found the most, not value in, but the thing that like really stuck with me and resonated the most is that I own an A7R5. I also owned an A7CR, and I sold that because it was just too similar. It was doing too much of the same thing as the A7R5 was. This camera is that other end of the spectrum where it's like this, an A7CR, then an A7R5. But for the most part, when I was using the A7CR, I was always using it with like a compact 28 to or 24-ish to like 50 millimeter-ish lens anyway, and I wasn't really straying outside of that. So to use it in the proper context for what it was, I had to use it with a small lens anyway, like this. And as somebody who is going to use this as kind of like a primary compact camera that I'm going to bring with me every single day. I'm going to bring it to a coffee shop. I'm going to bring it out with friends. I'm going to bring it to the park with my kids. The smaller that I can get a camera, the better. It is a little bit larger because the lens here is larger, but it's definitely a compromise I'm willing to make. This makes a ton of sense to be able to have just a built-in f2 lens that is this small. And honestly, yeah, it's not the sharpest lens in the world. The Leica Q series, I'm sure, out-resolves it. But the 60 megapixel sensor in here is really, really good. And I find that it is unique enough, has enough character, and just looks really, really good that I find that I really just enjoy the images out of this. It's the perfect kind of combination of having something that's kind of unique and not super sterile feeling, while also having significantly better autofocus than the Leica Q series. And, you know, Sony just nails their autofocus so well. And to be fair, I am just so accustomed to the way that Sony does their autofocus systems as well, that it's just so intuitive to me. Now, one of the things that I told the engineers straight to their faces that I wish was better about this camera was I wish it had a better viewfinder, and I do wish it had the flip screen on the back. That being said, my entire take on this camera is that it's so good because of how small it is. And so as I've kind of like recalibrated what I want this camera to be, it's made a lot more sense to me that it has a smaller, lower resolution EVF and it doesn't have a flip screen. Those things, again, I would love to have those on here, but if it bulked up the camera more than it already was, it'd be taking away from the thing that I think this camera does the best, which is be the most incredible camera it can possibly be in the smallest form factor possible. Now, as I've kind of rambled on about the fact that it is just so small and so compact, and the ability to just use it anywhere, I can see a few of you going like, wait a second, is that a grip on there? Are you making this camera bigger? Also, you have a thumb grip on there? Like, isn't that making the camera bigger? All of those things are a yes, but it's already small enough that I do feel like I'm not making that big of a difference by adding these things. And I think that while I don't necessarily need either of these, and the ability to just hold this with a couple of fingers like this because you have an extra grip on there is really, really useful. Do I need that to be the case? No, I'm almost always using this with like a shoulder strap or something like that. Anyway, I will say that I do think that these are really, really useful tools. And if you are thinking about purchasing this camera, I would definitely recommend them. They're from IDS Works, which is the company that makes a ton of the different base plates and stuff that I use for my Leica cameras. And the other bit being that I do just think that this little square hood looks really good and kind of completes the package. The only thing about it that is a little bit of a bummer, and the only thing about the camera that's a little bit of a bummer that I've realized I had to sort of overcome, is that it only goes down to, or it speeds up to 1/2000th of a second as its max shutter speed. And with this camera having a base ISO of 100, if you're shooting this wide open in a sunny day at f2, you're going to find that 1/2000th of a second isn't fast enough to use with the leaf shutter here. And this sensor, I have a similar sensor on lots of different cameras. It's way too slow to use in electronic shutter mode, so I would not recommend doing that. One of the things I do recommend doing, though, is picking up this little filter from Polar Pro. It is the Short Stash Everyday filter. I have this filter in about 6 different sizes because I put it on almost every camera I have. And the thing about this that makes it really unique and useful is it is a really, really light kind of mist filter that gives a little bit of digital softening up of especially the highlights, where the highlights kind of bloom into the shadows, and it takes away that harsh kind of digital edge. The other bit, though, if you can see it, and yeah, you can see it like on my hands and stuff, it blocks out about 1.33 stops or so of light, meaning that if you put this on the front of your camera, in front of the lens here, it's going to block out 1 stop and a little bit more of light, giving you a lot of extra flexibility to be able to shoot wide open at f2 at ISO 100, making this a lot more viable. So it is one of those things where if I'm going out in a brighter environment, I'm going to have this filter on there. It also doubles as a mist filter, but also a circular polarizing filter. So I can cut out reflections and glare and things like that a lot easier with this. And ultimately, that is the piece of the lens and the filter that cuts about a stop and a third or so of light, again, making this really, really useful. So ultimately, this thing has incredible image quality. It has the same sensor as the A7R5 and the A7CR, which is one of the best 35 millimeter sensors I've ever used. The dynamic range out of this thing, the detail out of this thing is incredible. I just love using this camera. I really, really enjoy it. I think that the reason for me that it makes a lot more sense is because this is an additional camera to me. What makes a lot of sense, and the reason why I'm okay with it not having a flip screen, with it having a really poor, small, tiny little EVF, is because this isn't the only camera I own. This is I'm going to pack the most amount of features and resolution and dynamic range and character and lens. It's all just the one smallest package. And it's frankly the reason why I sold my A7CR and my X100VI, because the X100VI I really liked, but it just didn't have that same depth to the images that this does. And so I was able to sell both of those, pick this thing up, and I have not regretted it, to be completely honest. Like, it is a dream camera to have. And it is the reason why I picked this up over the Leica Q series. But as it currently sits, having this to be able to just take with me everywhere and make really, 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 really good images that fit into my exact workflow for my professional stuff, I can just toss on the exact same presets. I can do the exact same looks. I can just use the same apps. It just fits into my workflow so well in a way that the other cameras don't. And I'm also not looking for it to be an experience camera. I don't need the Leica experience with this thing. I don't need it to be a departure from my other stuff. I just want like the same quality I'm used to in a really, really small package, and that does exactly this. So let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. I know this is my specific use case as someone who owns just a ton, too many cameras. I just own too many cameras, let's be honest. But it is the reason why this camera makes so much sense for me in particular, and the reason I chose it specifically over the other cameras that often are kind of lumped into this same category. So if you want to check out my initial review where I talk a lot more about the specs and kind of my initial thoughts about this camera, you can do so up here. Check out my other video on the Leica Q3 monochrome up here, and I will see you in one of those.